Welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Minash. On today's show, we're talking about how demand patterns will change in the wake of the pandemic. How will our world be different post-pandemic? Will people want to dine out the way they did before? I just spent a month in Mexico at a resort with incredibly beautiful restaurants, and I have to say I really enjoyed the dining out experience after nearly 2 years of not experiencing restaurants at all. Like anything, there will be a transition, but transitions always come in waves. Transitions are started by innovators. These are the folks who are blazing the trail before anyone else is even aware that an option exists. Next, they're followed by the early adopters. These folks love to try things that are new. The next major group are the early majority, followed by the late majority, and then finally the laggards. This adoption curve applies to virtually anything. It applied historically to the radio, then television, then video cassette recorders, digital cameras, and cell phones. It applied to the steamship, air travel, and it'll eventually apply to space travel. The adoption curve applied to buying groceries online. It applies to electric cars. The adoption curve applies to working from home. It applied to using credit cards for purchases instead of cash. And today, that same curve will apply to the changes in the way people travel, the way people choose to live. When you look at the adoption curve, it looks like the letter S. Adoption is slow at first, and then it accelerates through the middle, and then finally takes a long time to reach the remaining holdouts in the population. I still know a few people who don't own a cell phone. They're not very many, but I know a few. The question is, how long are these adoption curves? How long until 50% of the population adopts a new trend? How long until 90% adopts the new trend? How long did it take for 50% of the population to start using social media? How long until people stopped looking up phone numbers in the printed phone book instead of using online search tools? How long until people will return to air travel post-pandemic? How do you tell the difference between a fad and a trend? Early on, the numbers look very similar. Will the technology fizzle before ever reaching mainstream adoption? See, the landscape is littered with technologies that failed to make it. The 8-track tape is a great example. I think hybrid cars are a good example as well. Hybrid cars are widely used in taxi fleets where fuel economy is important. But overall, despite massive increase in market growth in 2021, hybrid vehicles only represent about 5% of total light vehicle sales. We're still in that early adopter part of the curve. Fully electric vehicles represent about 3% of the total market. We're still in that early adopter territory as well. I think back to the use of video conferencing. I started using it in the early 1990s. My company, which was in the communications business, was always seeking ways to save money on travel. The technology was clunky, expensive, and slow. We were definitely innovators in those days, but today, even those who would describe themselves as technology laggards can be regularly found in a Zoom meeting. It's common to see someone holding a video chat over their phone. Years ago, that was not the case. The understanding of the adoption S-curve was deeply studied in Geoffrey Moore's famous book called Crossing the Chasm. The most difficult and dangerous place for companies is the transition from early adopters to early majority, when things really become mainstream. Companies that fail to break out of the early adopter phase into the early majority phase, they will die. Today, we have a few cruise ships traveling the globe. They're mostly empty, carrying about 20% of their true passenger load. Was the growth of the cruise ship industry a trend or a fad? We don't know yet. How long until restaurants return to 90% of their pre-pandemic demand? How many people have changed their habits and patterns forever? How many people will go back to the gym for exercise? In the past 2 years, some people built their own home gym. Others simply stopped exercising. The return to the gym will follow an adoption curve. The return to restaurants will follow an adoption curve. Return to cruise ships and hotels and trains and airlines will all follow an adoption curve. The question is whether you're dealing with a fad or a trend. A fad will achieve market prominence and then fade. Is electronic commerce a fad or a trend? Are takeout meals a fad or a trend? Are home offices a fad or a trend? And then how are these trends or fads related? Is your real estate capable of providing, for example, rapid charging for electric vehicles if that's truly a trend? Do your buildings have secure e-commerce delivery lockers? Homes in the old days used to have a locker for milk delivery next to the front door. Fascinating that the same concept is being reincarnated decades later but on a larger scale. Is burning of fossil fuels for home heating going to disappear, as has been legislated in certain states? Will homes be required to replace their gas-fired furnaces with electric systems in the future? And will traditional mail delivery be relevant even a decade from now? As you think about that, pay very close attention to the adoption curve. Have an awesome rest of your day. Go make some great things happen. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.